Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Mindful in Minutes podcast. I'm Kelly, and today we are going to chat about something that has probably happened to all of us at one point or another, even if we didn't realize it, and that is overstimulation. So this is a term that is becoming more and more popular. I feel like I'm seeing it everywhere, like all over social media. People are talking about it more, and I think that's great. I think that a big piece of overstimulation is that we aren't as aware of it, but we're becoming more aware of it. And so I'm really happy that it's just coming more into the zeitgeist, and I wanted to dive deep into it. So what we're going to be talking about is what it is, how we become overstimulated, what's happening in our bodies and in our brains when this happens, the different types of overstimulation, signs you're overstimulated, how we can reduce it, and of course, how we can meditate when we are overstimulated. And so all the things, I have a lot of notes here. I have a lot to say about overstimulation because it's something that plagues me. We'll talk about this, but if you are neurodivergent, you're more susceptible to overstimulation. So we're going to talk about that. And yeah, I have a lot to say about this topic because one of the best things you can do, there's many things you can do depending on what type of overstimulation you're experiencing, but something that's really great just for general overstimulation is meditation. And yeah, so we're going to talk about it. The one quick reminder is that meditation teacher training enrollment closes at the end of the day Friday. So if you're listening when this episode is released on the 1st, you have about 2 days if you'd like to join. I'll link to the information in the show notes. I've been talking a lot about it. And if you are feeling called to be a meditation teacher, I would love to take that journey with you. If it's not for you, I am still so grateful that you are here. One other, not necessarily like housekeeping thing, but you might be wondering, Kelly, I thought you did Freeform episodes every other Wednesday. Didn't you just have one last week? Yes, I did. And if you listen to that one, you'll know that when I was filling out my color-coded spreadsheet where I write for the whole year, so soonish, I'll start working on the new year, but I fill out like the whole year. I put all the dates. I indicate with different like colors, whether it's a guided meditation, whether it's a Freeform or something else, like a guest episode, that type of stuff. I kind of plan it all out, put the dates out. And I, for some reason, when I went from September to October, I had some kind of a glitch and I just put the next Freeform episode as October 1st. And then I filled out the whole rest of the year following that first October Freeform episode being on the 1st. So we're just going to roll with it. So instead of changing the whole rest of the year's plan, we're just doing an extra episode and talking about overstimulation. So diving right in, what is overstimulation? I feel like people talk all the time saying they're overstimulated, or when my kids get overstimulated, or you always see these memes like when you're overstimulated, so your husband's chewing is like the worst thing ever. They talk about I'm overstimulated, but what does that mean? And plain and simple, when the brain and nervous system are receiving too much input, that it can't effectively process it. That's it. So overstimulation is just the brain and the nervous system. There's way too much input and it can't effectively process it. So overstimulation is biology. It's not weird. It doesn't mean that you're weird or different or broken. Basically, your nervous system is designed to take in information from your environment. So sight, sound, smell, touch, even the emotions of people around you, the needs of others, and process it so that you can respond. This is something that is incredibly important when you think about when we are hunter and gatherers, we're outside, we're picking our berries, and then we hear a rustling in the leaves somewhere. We have to be on high alert and be like, is that a bear? Is that a squirrel? Is that someone else? Like, what is that, right? And so our nervous system is meant to take in this sensory information, process it, and then respond and do something about it. But when our input becomes greater than what the nervous system and the brain can handle in that moment, that's where you then can tip into what's called overstimulation. And it's the same way that like a computer freezes when you have too many tabs open. So there's nothing wrong with that computer. It's just, it needs a reset. It's trying to do too much at once, which I wrote this in my notes. And as I wrote that analogy in my notes, and I'm sitting here looking at all of my open tabs on my computer, and I'm like, I do also often equate woman brain and particularly mom brain to like having a browser with like 50 different tabs open and like you're actively doing something on all of those tabs. They might be different things, different tasks, but they are all like open and working. And there are times that it just kind of like shuts down because there's too much that's open. But everyone basically has just a certain stimulation threshold, and it can take different amounts of stimulation to reach that. So think about it as a bucket. I actually took a workshop recently on overstimulation and specifically like when we're overstimulated, how it can be hard to make decisions and do different transitions. It was really interesting. And it was specifically for kids, but I feel like it applies to, all sorts of things. So if you think about a bucket, and if you start your day and you have just an empty bucket, right? And when you have different types of stimulation, when things are loud outside, for me, it's always like walking into my kitchen. There's always crumbs on the kitchen floor, even if I sweep or vacuum. You get something stuck to your feet and you're like, oh, I don't like that. Maybe the TV's on, or someone's watching TV and you're trying to listen to a podcast at the same time, right? As we get these different types of like stimulation, it's putting water in that bucket. And when it gets all the way full and there's too much, it's going to overflow. And that's when you get to overstimulation. And everyone has kind of a different bucket. So some people, their buckets are smaller, some are bigger. So they just have a bigger or smaller threshold for what they can manage without getting tipped into that overstimulation state. Also, sometimes you might start the day with some water in it already. You can have kind of this residual, this overstimulation. We'll talk about that. But once your bucket is full of water, that's kind of it. You have to find a way to then like empty the water. So the difference between overstimulation and stress, they are related, but not the same. So overstimulation and stress, they often get lumped together, but they're not the same thing. So stress is kind of more this like broad umbrella term. It's the body's response to a challenge or a demand. So that could be physical, mental, emotional. I mean, we all know stress, right? It can come from deadlines, relationship conflicts, money worries, physical exertion, right? Like physical stress. If you go out for a run, that's physical stress on the body, the state of the world, all sorts of stuff. Stress is broad. Many, many, many things are stressors. Overstimulation, on the other hand, is specifically input overload. That's it. So it's specific. Too much noise, too many distractions at once, too many things happening at once to make a decision, too many emotions swirling around at once, too many sights, sounds or notifications that are all competing for your attention at once, too much time on your device, that type of stuff. So sometimes stress can cause overstimulation, and sometimes overstimulation can create stress, but they're kind of like different entry points. So stress is just something that's demanding energy from me, where overstimulation is like too much is happening to me for my system to process at once. So stress is kind of more just like that general pressure, where overstimulation, I think about it as like if you blow a fuse in your house, for example, if too much energy goes to the fuse and it kind of goes boom, and it just like blows a fuse, that's kind of that overstimulation. It's like too much, and so it just kind of just blew a fuse. So signs that you might be overstimulated. Let's talk about what it actually looks like and feels like in the body and the mind. So I would say one of the biggest ones is going to be irritability. You feel snappy, short-tempered, like it's just like the tiniest little thing will set you off. You're like so on edge. And then there's just like one more thing. You're like, oh. So it might be something where usually you could manage it. So maybe your kids are chatty like mine. And so your kids' repetitive questions, you're like, oh my gosh, you've been asking me so many questions. Enough. Like that might be a sign of overstimulation. Again, the sound of like your partner's chewing, it just seems like unbearable. Things that just usually feel like you could manage them in a regular state, it feels like you cannot manage it. Like it's just one more thing. It's like that straw that broke the camel's back. I'm trying to think of some recent examples because I definitely get really irritable when I'm overstimulated. A lot of it is just really kind of being snappy and just like short. Yeah, that's it. I'm trying to think of things that recently made me overstimulated. I get really overstimulated by noise. So a lot of times it's like if everyone's being loud, maybe the kids are listening to, we call it like their story box, right? It's one of those like Tony's boxes where you put the little guy on it and they'll tell you like a story. Maybe that's going. One of the kids is doing that. Maybe another kid is like singing a song. Maybe my husband is like talking on the phone about a work thing. And then Mila starts barking and it's all this noise at the same time. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I just like cannot handle all this noise at once. And then I definitely get irritable. So that is a big one. Fatigue is another one. So maybe your body feels heavy. Maybe you feel like you're moving through like water or quicksand. You might feel completely drained or even burnt out, but we will talk about the difference between overstimulation and burnout because they're not the same. And overstimulation is draining because your brain is working overtime to filter information. So it uses up kind of that energy reserve, that mental power. Again, you have that browser and all those tabs are open. Things just start moving slower until it eventually has to it freezes or you have to like restart. Trouble focusing is a big one. So you might read the same sentence like 3 times and not remember what you said. Tasks that felt simple like earlier in the day or on a different day feel either impossible to start or to work through. You might just sit there kind of looking at like a blank screen, feeling kind of like fried. I do this one sometimes where I kind of sit there and I'm like, it's like I'm like, what am I doing? Also, when I'm overstimulated, I find that overstimulation just kind of exacerbates some of my like ADHD tendencies. So I'll get kind of forgetful too with that trouble focusing. So I'll do a lot of like, I'll walk into a room or I'll walk upstairs. And by the time I get up there, I've forgotten what I went up there for. And then I'll come back downstairs and I'll sit back down at my desk and I'm like, oh yeah, I went up there to get this or whatever. So that's a really common one. Feeling fried or wired. So this is kind of like that restless energy when your body feels like it's super revved up, but also exhausted. So often you'll hear this called wired but tired, especially at night. So I hear about this one a lot from all of you when you are using sleep meditations to fall asleep, because a lot of times you're feeling that kind of wired but tired. It's like your body is so exhausted, but your mind is going a million miles an hour. And it's just like, oh my gosh, it's like internally you're just like buzzing, but like you're just so exhausted at the same time. And even though your body is just like begging for sleep, it's hard to find it. That's often kind of that wired but tired feeling. You might feel like your heart rate is elevated, your shoulders are tight, your jaw might clench, right? Your body is kind of saying like there's too much going on. Another one that I think is pretty common, but we don't always identify this as like an overstimulation thing, is the urge to retreat. So you might want to, take some quiet time, move away, hide in the bathroom. I think about this like, you don't have like those big family gatherings and it's like there's a bajillion people all at once and it's like so loud and you're like, okay, I'm going to go to the bathroom, and you just spend like 5 or 10 extra minutes in there because it's just like quiet and alone. It's like that kind of a thing. Maybe you just want to curl up in bed. Maybe you want to be in a dark place. You want to be alone, a quiet place. And for some, it can show up as social withdrawal. So you can't handle like one more conversation, one more noise, one more social demand. This one definitely applies to me, if you couldn't tell by my big family gatherings, hiding in the bathroom. But that's a really common one too, is kind of this urge to like retreat or take a break from all that sensory input. And then for some of us, it's going to show up as physical sensation. So if we tend to be like either really physically in tune with our body, or even the opposite, where it's like we might have a hard time distinguishing the mental emotional effects of overstimulation, that it just kind of kicks into the body. We might be more in tune with that. That could be headaches, tension in the shoulders, sensitivity to light or sound, digestive discomfort. There is some evidence that suggests that overstimulation can trigger migraines if you are susceptible to those. And the body really doesn't separate like mental from physical overstimulation. It just spills into both. And so you'll often get symptoms like from both sides. So like what if you think about me walking in my kitchen and I just like one of my coping mechanisms, I only wear slippers in the house now, or socks. Like I just don't do bare feet in the house. But like a physical overstimulation might be walking into the kitchen and like something sticks to your feet or something. You're like, oh, I don't like that feeling. Or like tags on clothes is really common, right? You don't like the feeling of that tag. That's a physical overstimulation, right? Too much of that touch in a certain area, but you still might get that irritability. That's more of like an emotional side effect to it. So that's when I say that you can get kind of both. Your body can't really separate from like mental overstimulation or physical overstimulation. It just kind of spills into both. So another recent example this weekend, we had Poppy's 2nd birthday, which a whole conversation for another day. I can't believe Poppy is like 2. I don't know about you guys, but doesn't it seem like I was like just pregnant with her? I don't know. That's how it feels for me. Anyways, so Poppy's 2nd birthday was this weekend, and it was a great party. Everything was great, but everyone was feeling the effects of it after. The kids were tired. I was tired. The kids were kind of grumpy. They were bickering with one another. By the time it was bedtime, because it was like a late afternoon party, the kids were crying. And I think sometimes it's easier to see these things like in kids because they are so fluid with their emotions. But I definitely was feeling it too. There was just a lot happening. There's that social overstimulation, a lot of sound, a lot of colors, different smells, like being in a different place, that type of stuff. And then I would say up until, a couple of days, like even yesterday, the kids were still kind of like, I'll call it like the party hangover. But really it's just kind of that like lingering overstimulation from like that big event. So let's talk about the different types of overstimulation because it's not like a one size fits all. There's different ways that you can get overstimulated. The first one, I think the one that we're most common with is going to be sensory overstimulation. So this is when one or more of your senses, so sight, sound, touch, smell, taste, are overloaded with input. Most commonly, it's going to be sound, touch, or sight, but the other ones it can apply to. And this is because the nervous system can only filter so much sensory data. So bright lights, loud noises, strong smells, too many textures at once, or one specific, something on the feet or tags of your clothes all at once, it can overwhelm the sensory processing centers. So this is where then you might just feel like, kind of irritable, but it's very much like there's just too much sensory input coming in at once. So this could be like going to the grocery store. There's usually music playing. There's like carts clanging around, people talking, fluorescent lights. That can be overstimulating. Going to like a concert or like a sporting event with crowds, noise, stimulation from every direction. Parents are much more likely, especially primary parents, are much more likely to get sensory overstimulation. There's always like kind of kids like pulling at you or sitting on you, hey, especially if your kids are little, like hanging off of your body. The toys might be loud, siblings might be yelling, dogs barking. Yes, I am just describing a lot of my like mornings here, but it's really easy to kind of get that sensory overstimulation, especially if you've heard the term like touched out. That just means that you have had way too many people like touching you when you're a mom in particular, and or I shouldn't say just a mom, the primary parent. So primary parent just being the parent that takes on the majority of kind of that like physical care for kids. The primary parent tends to get touched out because they just have a lot of kids, hold me, pick me up, can I sit on your lap? Even if it's like, let's snuggle, things like that. Sometimes you're like, okay, can people just not, be clinging on me for a little bit? So that's all sensory overstimulation. Then there's emotional overstimulation. So this is when you're flooded with too many strong emotions at once, either your own or other people's, possibly even both at the same time. So I think about emotional overstimulation, like, for example, if you go to a funeral or it doesn't have to be something that extreme, but I think sometimes when we're talking about overstimulation to kind of talk in the extremes or an experience that probably most of us have had, it's kind of easier to describe it that way. So like you go to a funeral, you have your own strong emotions there and also like the emotions of the collective or any kind of like a highly emotional charged event where it can be not just your own and not just other people's, but it could be like everyone's all at once. And it's just like, you just feel so drained and you can like shut down a little bit and it's just like so much. That would be a big case of like emotional overstimulation. Also, if you just have your own, like you're just like flooded with these emotions, that can be really common. Sometimes this happens even, not often, but sometimes in meditation or yoga nidra, where you have kind of what they call like an emotional release, or maybe you recall something, or you have some kind of like a breakthrough. It could even be like a positive emotional release, like you're filled with like such joy. Sometimes that can lead to like a little bit of a hangover or kind of that feeling of overstimulation, kind of you need to let the dust settle a little bit. But basically what happens is that emotions activate the limbic system, specifically the amygdala, right, which is the pain, fear, worry, kind of like the emotion center of our brain. And if multiple emotional inputs start to stack up, the brain has a hard time then regulating its emotions. It has a hard time being like, okay, if my emotional pendulum is just swinging crazy from like left to right, and your limbic system and even your prefrontal cortex are trying to work together to bring that pendulum back to like the midline so it's not swinging from side to side. At a certain point, if it just is swinging out of control, it's just like, okay, I can't even like stop that swinging right now. And it can have a hard time regulating those emotions. This can be crying easily, snapping at others, shutting down, feeling like it's all too much. Really common for that emotional overstimulation. So again, this could be something like, an extreme example, if you go to like a funeral or something, or some kind of an emotionally charged event. It can be a day where you cycle through just a lot of different emotions. Maybe it's one of those days where it's like you're kind of getting this like emotional whiplash. There's a lot happening. Maybe you're excited and then something happens and you're like super stressed and something else happens. You're like so sad. And then, someone says something to you that's like so kind. And then it's just like too many emotions in a day. That can definitely cause emotional overstimulation. Being around highly emotional people, so that could be like kids melting down, that could be a friend who's venting, it could be coworkers that are maybe arguing. This could sometimes be like if you were a kid and your parents were arguing a lot. We do know there's studies that show kind of, what arguing in a household can do to kids, but that can cause emotional overstimulation. Again, if you're a parent, that could be like feeling your child's big emotions and holding space for their big feelings while also you're holding your own stress. This sometimes happens to me. Like, if the kids are having big feelings and they're crying and they're being really loud and maybe they were both like bickering with each other. And then we really hit a milestone, you guys, this summer, I would say. I can't remember if I told you this or not. This is like my one little tangent, I guess. I'll give myself this one. But I distinctly remember this summer, there was a moment where I realized I'd hit a milestone where I had like 2 kids in my house. It wasn't a kid and a baby because Pork Chop and Poppy were bickering, not even bickering. They started like screaming at each other over like what music to listen to in the car. And I just remember I got in the car and they're like screaming at each other. Pork Chop wanted to listen to the Cars soundtrack and Poppy wanted to listen to Frozen. So it was like, a Disney v Pixar like battle. And I was just like, I just remember sitting in the front seat and I was like, oh my gosh, they are officially old enough to have like a proper like sibling squabble in the back seat. But anyways, anyone who has had a sibling or has more than one kid, it's like when they are, they just have a squabble and then everyone's crying and yelling and they both want a parent to like help them through that thing, right? So you have your own stress of being like, everyone's screaming and crying and they were just, feuding and then I had to do this thing. That can be that kind of emotional overstimulation. So anyways, a big milestone in my household where I now have 2 kids that can like properly like throw down with one another. And then anyone who is an empath or a highly empathetic person is more likely to absorb emotions from others and can feel extra overloaded. This is really common too, I would say, with people who meditate, but people who just self-identify as being highly sensitive or empaths. If you're taking on other people's emotions, you're much more likely to get that emotional overstimulation. And then there isn't a lot of room for like your own emotions. And there's cognitive overstimulation. So this is too much information or too many decisions or tasks for the brain to manage at once. This happens when the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain right behind the forehead, has kind of this limited bandwidth. So it's trying to do like executive functioning. And if you get information overload, you're going to get decision fatigue. So this could feel like mental fog, forgetfulness, procrastination, difficulty focusing, zoning out. This could be like if you're reading a bunch of emails while also trying to, I have to pay my phone bill or whatever. Maybe you have like 20 things on your to-do list. You have no idea where to start. You can't get it all done in a day, but somehow you have to get it all done in a day. Scrolling, like doom scrolling, looking at the news, headlines that you're just like taking in all this information until you just feel like your brain feels like waterlogged. This is really the one where it's like you have too many tabs open on your browser or like too many apps going at once and it can cause everything to freeze. And then we have social overstimulation. So this is when you have prolonged or intense social interactions that drain your nervous system. So why this happens, basically socializing requires this constant processing. So reading facial expressions, reading tone, body language, managing your own responses, trying to listen to people. For introverts and sensitive people, this can be particularly taxing. And so when you are in these social environments, maybe it's also probably loud. With overstimulation, it's usually like a few of these things layered on top of one another. So you might already be sensory overload because maybe you're at a party, for example, it's loud, and then you have all of these people. Maybe you're bouncing in and out of different conversations and things, but that's going to be, kind of this social overstimulation. And this might feel like exhaustion after events, irritability, strong desire to just be alone, withdrawing from conversations. If you're like me, retreating to the bathroom for a few quiet minutes. And things, I mean, this happens a lot, long family gatherings where like everyone wants your attention, conferences, networking events, weddings, kids' birthday parties or play dates where noise is piling up, or you're trying to kind of chat with everyone, or you're talking to a mom, but then your kids need stuff, that kind of thing. And it's not just an introvert thing. I am an introvert, so this one in particular really gets me. But extroverts can also feel peopled out if the input just outweighs their capacity. But that's one of those situations where like extroverts, when it comes to the social overstimulation, their bucket's probably just bigger. Where like an introvert, they probably have a smaller bucket, and so it might get filled up with that water faster. Then we have digital overstimulation. This one's a biggie. So this is going to be overload from screens, notifications, and endless digital input. This is probably the most recent type of overstimulation that's been added just as we become more and more addicted to our phones and our devices. So why this happens is because the brain wasn't designed to process infinite scrolling, this constant novelty, these like quick, intense dopamine hits from like notification, from algorithms, things like that. And a lot of times digital overstimulation, that's going to look like restlessness, poor sleep, difficulty focusing online, anxiety, and inability to just do one thing at a time. All of that. So this might look like you're scrolling for what feels like a few minutes, and then either it's been like an hour or you're feeling mentally drained. Notifications constantly going off when you're trying to do something else. You get this fragmented attention. You see this in kids a lot, right? They're overstimulated if they play like hours of video games or having a lot of screen time. And this one is definitely like the fastest growing form of overstimulation just because of modern technology that we have. Something that I'm going to call out at the end of the episode, but it seems relevant now. There's two things I'm going to call out, and they're two free 5-day meditation like email things that I have. One is the nervous system reset. The other one is called Stop the Scroll. So if you're listening to this kind of like digital overstimulation, I'm going to link to it in the show notes, and you can click that link, and then it basically, I have it set up so like every day you have a meditation and then a screen-free activity to do for like 5 days. I've gotten really great feedback on that one and how it's helping people kind of work with this digital overstimulation. So anyways, I'll put that there. And then the nervous system reset is good for just like any kind of overstimulation, but I'll make sure I link to both of those in the show notes. Okay, so with these different, I know that was a lot, but all of those different types of overstimulation, basically what happens is that these different, categories are going to overlap. So it's rarely just one, right? Maybe you are on your phone and also you're in a loud space. So you're getting sensory overstimulation, you're getting digital overstimulation. Maybe you are at a party and so you are getting social overstimulation, and then you're getting sensory overstimulation because there's just a lot of people there, for example, right? A lot of times they're going to overlap. And if you have these two different things pouring into that bucket, it's going to get full really quickly. So I briefly wanted to talk about the difference between overstimulation and burnout, because when I was kind of compiling these notes, I realized a lot of the symptoms feel the same. But the big thing is that overstimulation is a temporary state where your nervous system is flooded with more input than it can handle. So think like you have that party and then you come home and you're like, oh my gosh, that was like so exhausting. Maybe you have like, a day where you just like rot in bed alone or something, or you go for like a nice walk or yoga class the next day. And then by like the day after that, you're feeling better. So it's temporary. It's usually short-lived, comes on quickly, fades once you've kind of reduced or removed that overwhelming input and given your nervous system some time to kind of reset and catch up. So it's kind of like if you're driving and there's a traffic jam, there's too many cars at once on the road. Once the traffic clears, things are going to move smoothly. Where burnout is a chronic state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion, which can be caused by long-term repeated stress without enough recovery or chronic overstimulation. So this is something that builds slowly over weeks or months, and it doesn't resolve quickly. It often requires major lifestyle shifts, rest, or even like professional support to fully recover. So it kind of, instead of that traffic jam where it's like you just have to, clear the cars and everything will move, it's kind of like the whole road itself is like damaged and needs to be repaired. So how long does overstimulation last? It kind of depends. Acute overstimulation, that's usually going to pass in minutes to hours. Basically, once you remove yourself from the input, right? You leave the party, you set your phone down, you go outside for a walk, that type of stuff. You start feeling better pretty quickly. But you can have some lingering effects, right? Like my kids that kind of had a party hangover for like 2 days. And then, of course, there's some individual variation. So highly sensitive people, introverts, parents of young kids, they often take a little bit longer to recover just because their baseline load is already a little bit higher, or like they start their day where their bucket's already a little bit full. But someone that has good nervous system regulation practices, like people who practice breath work, meditation, healthy routines, yoga, that kind of stuff, like honestly, probably like all of you, even if you just have like 1 or 2, you're probably going to bounce back faster. So let's talk about why we're so likely to get overstimulated and why I think we're hearing a lot more about it recently. And basically, I think it's because modern life, it's like your bucket is like full from the get-go, right? We have this high digital load, lots of notification. We live in this like always on culture. Our phones are always going off, like smartwatches are dinging, emails pile up, TV plays in the background, right? Even like grocery stores can be overstimulating. If you live in the city, that's a lot. Also, multitasking is the norm. Maybe you're trying to cook dinner while also listening to a podcast while helping your kid with their homework or talking to your partner. It's like the brain isn't really designed to truly multitask. And so it's rapidly switching between these tasks, which wears out the prefrontal cortex pretty quickly. Also, a lot of times we're in noisy environments. I do think sometimes now that a lot of us have switched or stayed to work from home, depending on what your home environment is, like open offices, crowded restaurants, traffic, construction being around, your area, kids, being around a lot of other adults, that type of thing can be noisy. It's just we kind of have this constant just like micro stimulus all the time. So even if it's, every little bit of stimulus that you get, it's like a drop in that bucket. If you then surround yourself and there's a lot of little drops happening all at once, it kind of fills it up pretty quickly. So then for some of us, we're just naturally more prone to this or more sensitive. So highly sensitive people, HSPs, there's about 15 to 20% of people fall into this category. I do believe this is self-reported. And but their brains process, I do know there's some research into like HSPs, but you'll hear a lot of people say like, I'm just sensitive or I'm an empath. And so if you fall into that category, or if it's been shown that your brain processes sensory information more deeply, it can make you more empathetic and observant, but it can also make you more easily overstimulated. This could also apply to people who have like sensory processing sensitivity. It also, if you are someone who is neurodivergent, like ADHD, for example, that's what I have, your brain already has challenges filtering input. So every sound, movement, distraction, it competes for your attention. If you have any other kind of neurodivergence, so whether you are on the autism spectrum, if you have another kind of like uncategorized form of neurodivergence, even if you have like ADHD, things like that, you're much more likely to get overstimulated. And then kids. So the younger you are, kids' nervous systems are still developing, so they reach sensory overload faster. In fact, an idea that I have for an episode, but I'm still kind of sitting with it, is I've been doing a lot of research and learning about how our nervous systems are developed and acquired. And it's actually really interesting. Anyways, if you're interested in an episode like that, let me know. Like, I don't know, if you're listening on Spotify, you can tell me or you can DM me. But it's really interesting because we aren't necessarily like we aren't born with like a fully formed nervous system. It's something that we acquire over time. And I just think it's really interesting, the process that it takes. But anyways, the younger you are, the more likely you are to get overstimulated just because you don't have that fully formed nervous system. So for example, like a 2-year-old may not quite have the same threshold for stimulation as like a 22-year-old, but anyone whose brain hasn't fully formed or nervous system hasn't fully formed, or if you have nervous system dysfunction, that can make you more sensitive to these things. Then just some lifestyle things that may make you more prone to overstimulation is going to be lack of sleep, right? So if you aren't getting enough sleep, it really impacts your brain, and your brain's filtering system can be sluggish. Poor nutrition, not eating when you're hungry. Basically, if you aren't taking care of your basic needs, you're more likely to get overstimulated. caffeine and stimulants. So these can rev up the nervous system, making you more alert, but also more reactive. So you might be primed to kind of like jump at every noise, be on high alert. Crowded environments, so public transport, airports, concerts, your nervous system's like constantly scanning multiple people, noises, movements all at once. Parenting young children, right? Little ones are loud, unpredictable. You need like this constant attention all the time, sleep deprivation. It's going to make you more likely to be overstimulated. And then there can be other factors too, right? This could be just if you have like communal living, if you live in the city, or any kind of a factor where you're already getting a lot of sensory input or overstimulation of some sort. Maybe you spend a lot of time in front of your computer. Maybe you work on a device for work. That's all going to kind of like make you more likely to get overstimulated. And then stress will shrink your window of tolerance. So your baseline stress, it really matters. So when you're always under this emotional strain, whether it be like work deadlines, relationship tension, financial worries, your body's resources are only partly like spent on managing that. So you have less capacity left for sensory or social input. And then stress hormones like cortisol, they keep your system in this state of vigilance. And in that state, even small triggers, background noise, someone chewing, things like that can push you over the edge. And then your window of tolerance narrows, meaning that you get pushed into overstimulation faster than you normally would, regardless of, whatever's going on. So let's talk about what's happening in our bodies and in our brains when we get overstimulated. And then we're going to talk about how do we help this? Now that we've had like the full overstimulation 101, then I want to talk about how can we make this better? Because we're all like, I would say the majority of us are chronically overstimulated, even if it's just kind of this like a little bit. But first, what's happening in the body and in the brain? So if we look at overstimulation from like a nervous system lens, overstimulation means that your sympathetic nervous system is activated without a real threat. So the sympathetic nervous system is responsible for fight or flight, and normally it's meant to activate in emergencies, right? If your car swerves, then you're like, and you run from danger, right? I always talk about the bear. You're on a hike, a bear crosses your path. It's that immediate like reaction that you have that is meant to keep you alive. It's important. Fight or flight is an important part of surviving. However, with overstimulation, everyday input, noises, screens, demands, they can trigger the same system. So it's always on high alert and your body reacts as if there's danger, even though you're like just in Target, going grocery shopping, or you're at work or at a kid's birthday party. So you're basically just, your nervous system is on high alert. It's in that fight or flight kind of chronically. And so we have to work to kind of switch out of that. When we look at the brain when we're overstimulated, the key players here are going to be prefrontal cortex, amygdala, and the hippocampus. So the prefrontal cortex, that's the part of the brain behind the forehead. This is like the CEO of the brain. It does decision-making, focus, planning. So if there's too much input going in there, it's going to overwhelm the circuits and like blow that fuse. So you literally can't think clearly, prioritize, or make decisions. So that's kind of when you get that decision fatigue where it's like, oh my gosh, I have made so many decisions today. I cannot even think about what I'm going to make for dinner tonight. I just can't decide. So that's a big one. Then your amygdala, which is that alarm system, it's the one that kicks off fight or flight. When you're overstimulated, the amygdala treats all of this neural input as dangerous. It's like, oh no, danger, there's trouble here. So even like a small trigger, so, your kid's whining or you hear a sound, a loud sound, you get those crumbs on your feet, it's going to feel like a big threat and your fight or flight is going to continue to go off and maybe get bigger. Also, we know that with time, the more that the amygdala is kind of in this chronic use, it actually gets bigger. So it starts responding faster and in a bigger way. Then your hippocampus, which is responsible for like memory and context, it's going to struggle. So normally the hippocampus would help you sort experiences. So like that's important, that's not important. In overstimulation, it's flooded. So it's harder to remember things or kind of keep context for things. This is where you're going to get forgetful, you're going to be zoning out, you might feel disoriented. So again, that's like when I'm overstimulated and I walk upstairs into the kitchen to get something. By the time I've gone up there, I'm like, what did I come in this room for? And then I forget. And then I go back downstairs and 5 minutes later, I'm like, oh yeah, I went up there to get a snack or whatever. So that's what's happening in our brain and then in our body. When we're overstimulated, we may experience an elevated heart rate. It's because we're in that fight or flight. So we're preparing to like run away or fight. stress hormone is released, so cortisol and adrenaline. This can increase blood sugar and heart rate. It can suppress your digestion, your immune functioning, your immune system, your ability to rest. You get reduced heart rate variability. So this is a marker of kind of nervous system resilience, this heart rate variability. So if you have low heart rate variability, you're less adaptable. You have a higher stress load. You could also get like a tight jaw, shallow breathing, sweaty palms, being sweaty, that type of thing. And so that's kind of in the short term. There are some long-term effects of chronic overstimulation. So chronic stress, chronic overstimulation, it can lead to burnout. It's definitely not good for like anxiety, depression, sleep issues, reduced cognitive function, memory, focus, that type of thing. It can impact your relationships if you're always snapping like at loved ones or you're withdrawing. And then for parents, overstimulation is a common contributor to parental burnout, which is a real thing. So now, let's just take a breath there. It's like all of that information. I feel like I just gave like, I don't know, like a little lecture in college, but I love it. I love this stuff. So that was just the Kelly that like has ADHD and has hyperfixations and is like, I want to understand every single thing about what is happening. Now, maybe it's also because I'm like a Gemini, right? These two sides of me. Now meditation teacher Kelly is stepping forward to be like, now that we understand what this is, why it happens, what's going on, what's causes all the WH questions, what, where, when, why. Now meditation teacher Kelly is going to come forward and just, swaddle you up, tuck you in, dim the lights, maybe light a little candle, and take a few deep breaths with you and talk about how we can reduce this overstimulation. And you absolutely can. Yes, we are kind of just chronically overstimulated. However, the big first step is recognizing the overstimulation, being like, oh, I'm overstimulated, and then being like, what is causing this? And then taking some intentional steps to start reducing that overstimulation. So a big thing is going to be different environmental strategies. So basically modifying the space around you to reduce sensory load. This can be anywhere. This can be in your house, on your commute, at work. Noise canceling headphones are a big one. This is going to help you cut down noise anywhere, at work, at home, on planes, even if you don't play music. Right? You could put AirPods in, just not listen to anything. It'll help cut down some of the sounds. There's like those loop earplugs that I don't have them, but so many people that I know do, and I think I need to get a pair. Also, this is good parents, right? Like we always have a pair or two with us, like in the diaper bag if one of the kids needs it. Sometimes it's just like, for example, Poppy's screaming and then Pork Chop is like, we're in the car and Pork Chop's like, she's being too loud. We could just like toss him a pair of those like over ear, like noise canceling headphones. And that helps, but definitely you can reduce, like noise canceling headphones are great. You can keep a pair in your bag or whatever, but also just being mindful of noise in general. So I try to only have, when possible, like one noise input at a time. So I would never also, like part of the stop the scroll is like one of the days it's like only do one screen at a time. So like I personally would never have the TV on and be scrolling on my phone at the same time. That would just be too much sound. It'd be way too overstimulating for me. I wouldn't have like music playing and try to be on a meeting at the same time, trying to listen to someone. Are there certain things where you can try to reduce the noise around you and just kind of have like one noise stimulus at a time when possible? Soft lighting. So this could be maybe not using overhead lights, maybe just using lamps. It could be living a little bit more with like the natural light where, when it gets dark out, you just kind of let your house be a little bit darker. If you can adjust this like in the workplace, that would be great. But yeah, like adjusting your lighting is great. Decluttering. So visual clutter, visual overstimulation is like when you walk into a place that's really cluttered, you feel super overwhelmed. This is me often. Your brain is trying to process like every item in view and it's too much. So maybe some decluttering, leaving less things out on the counter, that type of stuff. Like a simple space is going to help reduce your cognitive load. And that could be like, just start with like one thing, like maybe just your desk or the kitchen counter or the dining room table or something. It can really help. You could try creating some kind of a quiet corner. This is actually something at Pork Chops Preschool. I think it's so cool. I mean, so many things are different in school now than they were like when I was young. I know that makes me sound like my parents. Like when I was young, you'll never, we walked uphill both ways to school. But Pork Chops Preschool, they have a little quiet cubby, and it's kind of this like big sort of like box that's like open, on one side, and it's like quiet, and it has a few of these kind of like calming, like low stim activities, and it's not for playing at all. It's only for the kids to go in if they need like a quiet break, which I think is so cool. We have in our house like a little tent. It's just like a small like play tent, but it has like a door that you can close. So that's a place that the kids can go if they need a break, of course, like their rooms or whatever. But is there some kind of like a quiet corner? I know this is becoming more common. I've seen articles on like how to create a DIY quiet corner in your home. And I think it's really cool, actually. So it's like a designated retreat space where overstimulation is like off limits. So no screen, no clutter, low light. Maybe you can have some different like sensory tools there, like a weighted blanket, maybe some of that like therapy, whatever feels good to you. You can do that. And again, it can be good for kids and adults. It could even just be like a certain chair that's really comfortable with like a blanket in the corner that's like in a dark place. So that's one that I think is really cool. That's something that like if I had a little more space in my room, I do think I'd want like a designated, like we have it for the kids, but I'm kind of like, I want one. Although now I'm thinking about it, I am in front of my screen because I'm recording this podcast episode, but this tiny little podcasting closet, I'm like, this is kind of like my quiet corner. But yeah, so then building in, then there's some lifestyle adjustments. Right? So that was some like environmental things you can do, right? So basically take inventory for things as to like what sensory experience is overstimulating. Is it sound? Is it sight? Is it things like that? For me, like just wearing socks inside or slippers is really helpful. If you're someone who's bothered by tags, I know there's certain brands of clothes where they do tagless, that type of thing. So then some lifestyle adjustments. You could build in downtime after busy events. So just anticipate needing some recovery time instead of just like pushing through and on to the next thing. So if you have a family party or a work conference or a holiday, can you plan for a quiet night the day after? This is going to help your nervous system kind of reset and return to baseline. Limiting multitasking. So your brain is really only designed to do one thing at a time. So multitasking really just leads to this like micro overstimulation. So practice monotasking. One screen at a time, one activity at a time, one conversation at a time can really help limiting multitasking. Really good like digital hygiene. So if we're constantly scrolling, we're going to get that digital overstimulation. So, you can use different apps and things that will like close down other apps when you hit a certain time. You can use like the do not disturb. You can practice phone-free windows. So the first 30 minutes after waking up or an hour before bed, that type of thing. Again, I'm going to call it that stop the scroll because these are all things that we do for that. And then prioritizing sleep. I feel like any episode that even has like a science component to it, it's always like, if you get better sleep, it makes everything better in your life. So as best you can, prioritizing sleep. So sleep resets the nervous system. It increases resilience. And a lack of rest really just makes those small inputs feel overwhelming. So you could try to create like a little bedtime routine or like a wind down routine can be really great. There's a lot of content on this podcast too about like sleep, how to improve sleep, that type of thing. Some emotional and cognitive tools. So journaling or brain dumping, getting all of your thoughts out of your head and onto paper can be helpful. It helps to free up the cognitive load, reduces those like looping thoughts, those kind of chronic thoughts. So maybe you just free write for 5 to 10 minutes. Practicing saying no to extra commitments. Overstimulation, it often comes from like overscheduling. So I know this one's easier said than done, but maybe go out there and try to intentionally say no to like one thing this week. You can help kind of protect your energy by setting some of those boundaries. So just remember, no is a complete sentence. It's perfectly fine. I know this is hard, especially for my people pleasers. So start small. Maybe there's one thing you can say no to. And then maybe creating some recovery rituals. So these could be like little practices that help to signal safety and calm, maybe taking a short walk, a bath or shower, sitting quietly and having a cup of tea or coffee, as long as, the tea and coffee doesn't, really like jack up your nervous system. And over time, those rituals kind of train the body to like downshift faster. And then mind-body practices. These help to directly regulate the nervous system, so they're so good. Breath work is great, especially kind of decompressing breath work. So like box breathing can be good. That's an inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4, and repeat. 4, 7, 8 breathing is a popular one. It's not one of my personal favorites, but that's where you inhale for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8. I don't like that long hold for 7. I feel like it like makes my heart kind of be like, oh, when are we taking a breath? Instead, I like to just do an inhale for 4, like an exhale for 6, or an inhale for 5, exhale for 7. But making the exhale longer than the inhale does directly impact the nervous system and getting out of that fight or flight and into rest and digest. So breathing is probably one of the fastest ways to like down-regulate overstimulation. Even like 3 big deep cleansing breaths. So an inhale through the nose and like an open mouth exhale, letting go. Really great. Yoga Nidra is great. Or NSDR, which I don't think I talked about it here. Maybe it was on an office hours for my Yoga Nidra teacher training group. They were asking about the difference between Yoga Nidra and NSDR. And I think NSDR, I think that's a Huberman Lab thing. Similar to like iRest, or maybe did I talk about this in the Yoga Nidra episode? I can't remember. But Yoga Nidra is rooted in some more like ancient spiritual practices, where NSDR is more modern and does not kind of have that spiritual component to it. However, the techniques in the two are very similar. So they're not like that different. But anyways, either of those are really great for kind of this guided deep relaxation that brings the body into the parasympathetic dominance. And the research shows that it helps reduce stress hormone, increase your heart rate variability. So this can be really, really good if you're overstimulated. And if you have that wired but tired, you need some help falling asleep, it can be great. And then gentle movement. I wouldn't necessarily recommend like going and running like 10 miles. Maybe if you want to like blow off some steam, you can do that. But when you're overstimulated in particular, sometimes it's like an easy walk outside, just listening to the sounds of nature. Yoga, stretching, mobility work can be really good. It helps to kind of let go of some of that built up stress energy without overloading the system. And kind of like if you really want to get a lot of bang for your buck, I would do a little mindful movement with some mindful breathing, maybe end with meditation. I think that's like the trifecta. But overstimulation, it isn't something that you can like eliminate entirely. It's just a part of modern life, right? Like we are just, our senses are designed to take in sensory input, and there's just things going on around us. So it's really about kind of reducing the impact by combining some of these environmental tweaks, these lifestyle habits, emotional tools, mind body practices, and then also being aware of like your early signs of overstimulation and have some of these tools ready to utilize when you need it. So that's kind of the big thing. And then I wanted to wrap up our time by talking about why meditation specifically works so well for overstimulation. Meditation is absolutely one of the best tools that we have for overstimulation. I know that overstimulation is one of the main terms actually that people are searching for that bring them to like mindful in minutes. Or in particular, I'm pretty sure I've shared this story before, but like I do also take the meditations and like put them up on YouTube. It's still just like audio. There's no video component or anything. But I know it's a place that people go like for guided meditations. And I think I ended up taking it down on YouTube, nowhere else. But I did do an overstimulation meditation, I want to say in like maybe 2018 maybe, really early on in the podcast. And I was not, I think my meditations were still really good, but I think my skills as like a podcaster weren't as good. Like my intros were a little bit too long. I was still refining I'm still to this day refining my skill. But anyways, that overstimulation meditation did really well on YouTube. Like thousands and thousands of people were viewing it. And I think part of the reason the algorithm liked it was because so many people were leaving like the most angry comments about it, because on YouTube, because and this is just a YouTube thing, like it'll just play ads. I have it set so it can't play ads in the middle of a meditation, but it's just YouTube. Any video you click, it plays you like a few ads like before you do it. It's just how YouTube is. And then people will be like, They would just be really, and I get it, right? We just went through what's happening when you're overstimulated, and a big piece of that is irritability. But people would be leaving these like all caps, maybe I shouldn't laugh, but all caps comments being like, I'm already overstimulated and I don't need an ad for Athena razors being so loud in my ears when I'm trying to meditate. And like, I get it. They are overstimulated, but also it's just, I think like the YouTube platform in particular, it's not a place I like to get my guided meditations, like because of those reasons. But they were really upset. And then like, and then this woman is just like babbling on about, I don't even remember what it was, something, maybe like a training or something that was coming up. And then, like people were obviously like really, really overstimulated and very irritable. And I'm pretty sure I just ended up taking that meditation down, even though it was doing well, because I was just like, okay, this is not what people need in this moment. But the reason that I say all that is because, and it was definitely a good learning lesson for me as to like, how to improve the listener experience, especially because I'm not like, I'll put meditations on YouTube, but I mean, I really don't get YouTube that much. Anyways, it's just not my preferred platform because I don't use it that much. So I don't understand it as much. But anyways, but I know that the reason that meditation was doing so well is because so many people, when they're overstimulated, they're looking for something quick in the moment to help them. So a lot of times they'll put something like overstimulation meditation or mindfulness for overstimulation or something like that, like in the search bar, and that meditation would pop up. So I know that overstimulation is something that people are struggling with and that meditation is something that is phenomenal for it. But I want to talk about why. So the big piece of it is that meditation shifts the body into that parasympathetic mode, that rest and digest, right? So we know overstimulation is having, activation of the fight or flight. So meditation activates the parasympathetic nervous system, slows the heart rate, helps you to deepen your breath, lower your cortisol. It also helps you to kind of have this physiological shift. So the body is moving out of that like I'm in danger state to the like I'm safe state. And this can happen even in like 5 minutes of like a breath awareness meditation or a quick body scan or something. It doesn't have to be like a long meditation by any means, but pretty much very quickly within a few minutes, meditation can help you move into more of that parasympathetic state, the rest and digest as opposed to the fight or flight. So that's huge. So there's that, right? Just kind of getting out of that fight or flight state. It also helps to reduce sensory load by focusing your attention inward. So meditation acts like a filter. So instead of processing everything around you, your mind just anchors on one simple task. It could be the breath. It could be the body of a body scan. It could be just listening to the words of a guide, lead you through some, imagery. You could kind of turn inward and just focus on like one thing, how you're feeling. You can also do something like senses cycling, where you only pay attention to like one sense at a time, one of your senses at a time. So it really helps to kind of filter that sensory experience and like anchor you and just do like one thing at a time. It's that like, monotasking, just one thing at a time. It helps to reduce the input clutter and give the brain a break. And it kind of just... It helps you close out a couple of those tabs, for example, that you have open. And then meditation helps to increase your tolerance for sensory input over time. So regular practice strengthens the prefrontal cortex. We know this, right? This is Sarah Lazar's work, that the amygdala begins to shrink over time, and it can calm the amygdala, and then the prefrontal cortex actually gets bigger. There's more gray matter there. So we're rewiring our brain for smaller physiological responses from the amygdala of that fight or flight response, and a greater capacity for emotion regulation, focus, and that filtration system. And then over time, it's going to help expand kind of that window of tolerance for your overstimulation. So, things that maybe once used to overwhelm you quickly, they become a little bit more manageable with time. And I would say the best types of meditation when you're overstimulated, one's going to be any kind of like a breath awareness meditation. So just simply noticing the inhales and the exhales. That can be great. It's so simple, which often when you think about overstimulation, the best like antidote to that is simplicity. So sensory simplicity, simplicity in your environment, simplicity with your meditation. It really helps because overstimulation is like complexity or too much. So going to the other side of just simplicity, really, really helpful. So simply noticing the inhales and the exhales, even for a few minutes. Any kind of a calming breath, deep cleansing breaths, box breathing, a resonant or coherent breath. This is one where you try to do 5 breaths per minute. It's actually a part of our meditation on Sunday, which is an overstimulation meditation. That kind of new breath that I learned is in there. And then it's just really great for like a quick reset in moments of overwhelm. Then a body scan is really great. So it moves your attention slowly through the body so you can notice the sensations. It helps to anchor the mind in the present moment instead of with the racing thoughts. It can also help you release some of the physical tension from overstimulation. So that one's really great, really good for like grounding after a long day. If you're feeling overwhelmed, it can be really helpful. Then mindfulness meditation. This is where you're just practicing awareness of thoughts without feeling or reacting. So this really helps to kind of build on that non-reactivity. So instead of being like swept up by all the noise and emotion, you just learn to notice without like clinging to it or pushing it away. So you kind of can just sit, and you could sit and just notice what you hear. You could, if you hear car drive by, you could just kind of note like, oh, car drove by. Or if you hear the air conditioning turn on, you can note like air conditioning. Just kind of sitting and being present. Again, simplicity is really great. This is going to help kind of increase that tolerance for daily micro stressors. And then you can just have kind of one sense kind of take control at a time. Then yoga nidra is also great. Really great for a deep relaxation, really great for helping you to sleep. It can help shift your brainwave into a slower state, so more of that like theta delta, and it's really calming for the nervous system. So this would be really good when you're just feeling like totally like burnt out, fried, overstimulation, you need help sleeping, that type of thing. Yoga nidra is great for that. But really any meditation is going to be good. These would just be the ones that would be like if you came and had a private session with me and you said, I am struggling with overstimulation, these would probably be the first things that I would recommend. And then, as I mentioned, there are those 5. They're completely free. It's just like it sends you like a meditation and a little task every day over 5 days. There's the nervous system reset and stop the scroll. Maybe do both, and then you can do something like for 10 days. That could be fun. But I'm going to link to those in the show notes. And I hope that you have a wonderful, beautiful, low stim day. And I'll see you on Sunday for a overstimulation relief meditation.